everyone, my name's Kelvin and welcome back to another watercolor tutorial for Procreate. In today's video, I'm going to show you a very easy sort of Zen Wabi-sabi style painting technique, and we're going to use it to paint this naturalist bird scene. If you aren't super confident when it comes to painting animals and stuff, don't worry at all because this technique is pretty rock solid, and I think even if you're a beginner, you'll easily be able to follow this process. So I've already got the Forester paper texture loaded into Procreate, and I'm going to be using the regular watercolor brush kit along with a free Scratchy pen brush set you might already have. But I'll make sure to put download links to everything I'm using in the description below, including this free Scratchy pen brush set and the free sketch that you see me using here. I've already placed the sketch in here as the very top layer above the paper texture, and I've also set it to multiply. And that's just so it doesn't cover up what we're going to be painting, because from now on, we're going to be painting on a blank layer underneath the paper texture, just like you normally would. And to start painting, I'm going to grab the abstract round brush from the regular watercolor kit, and I'm going to choose a kind of medium yellowish orangish brown color. So I've got that abstract round set to maybe 45 or 50%, and I'm going to loosely fill out the head, the wings, and the tail, and I'm going to try to do those in as few strokes as possible. And after that, I'm going to go over it again using the same color and the same brush, just to add a couple of kind of darker areas in certain places. And after that, I'm just going to grab the water blender brush at the bottom of the list there, and maybe around 10%, I'm just going to use it to kind of break up some of these hard edges, and I'm also going to try to create some interesting blending patterns. Next, I'm going to grab the eraser brush, and I'm going to set it to the fine liner pen, and again around 10% or so, I'm just going to go around the edge of this and try to make it a little bit smoother. I don't want to get carried away by making it too perfect, but one thing about a bird like this, a small bird, is they're very sleek. So I'm going to try to erase the edges insofar as I can make this a little bit more smoother in terms of the silhouette. So as you can see here, I spent most of my time erasing just by focusing along the back of the bird to make sure that line is pretty smooth. Next, I'm going to move on and do the belly of the bird. So I'm going to grab the abstract round brush again, and same color that I was using before, I'm just going to shift it to a kind of a lighter grayer version of it, and I'll do my best to fill this in. And just like before, I've gone over it a few times up here because I want it to be a little bit darker, because after that I'm going to grab the water blender again and then mix up that hard edge. And after that, I'll grab the eraser again, same size, maybe around 10%, and I'll also clean up the lines along the belly here. So this is coming along really nicely, and next I'm going to move on and use the Scratchy Pens brush kit, the one I mentioned earlier, and I'm going to use those brushes to finish this up. So I'm going to go over to the Scratchy Pens. It looks like this. It's just these 4 brushes, and for the rest of this, I'm just going to use the Scratchy liner brush, and I'll start by selecting a black color, and I'm going to fill out the face details here. Now I just want to use that brush at a pretty small size, maybe even around 5%, because the face here, that's the focal point of this illustration, and that's actually where I'm going to spend most of my kind of attention to detail, just because I want the face to look as perfect as possible. So with this specific illustration, the face of the bird kept ending up kind of severe or kind of sharp. And the way I found to work around that is to actually give the bird something like eyelashes. So technically they would be feathers, but just to make this look a little more friendly, I'll just go like this. Next, while I've got this brush selected and the black color, I'm just going to do the rest of the black details here. So the wings are really simple. It's just a simple pattern here. You could do a different pattern, but I'll just kind of scratch this in real quick. And the tail feather is similar, just some very simple kind of horizontal lines. So the foot here, it's really easy. It's just the 1 foot, and the reason I did that is because this is a pretty abstract illustration, and I can kind of get away with just painting 1 foot, and it's really easy to fill in. I'll just kind of pencil it out like this. And just to make this one kind of come alive a little bit, I'm going to add a little highlight in the eye using the eraser brush. It's still set to the fine liner pen. I'm just going to use it at a really small size and just make a kind of a little comma shaped thing like this. So at this point the bird is looking pretty good, but it's definitely a little bit flat, and I want to add some highlights and shadows. I think shadows are a good thing to start with, so I'm going to grab the selection tool and set it to freehand, and I'm going to add a shadow just behind the head like this. Then I'm going to go to add another selection, and I'm going to add a shadow along the tail, and then another one down here like this, and I'm going to feather all those selections out at the same time. Then I'm going to go to hue, saturation, and brightness, and I'll just darken them like this. Next, I'm going to move on and do the highlights, and it's basically the same process. I'll just grab the selection tool and make a couple of selections along the body here, the head, the back, and the tail. And I'll feather all of those out at the same time, hue, saturation, and brightness, and I'll just brighten them like this. So at this point the bird is done, and I can move on to the background scenery. And I'm going to do the background on its own layer, so I'll make a new layer that's actually above the bird. And just for now, just so we can focus on the background, I'll switch off the layer with the bird. Now the brush here is the same brush that we did the black details on the bird with. I'm just going to change the color to a kind of olivey green tone, and I'll set the size maybe around 25-30%, and I'll just rough out the branches real quick. The main thing with the branches is that as they approach the kind of body of the tree that's off the painting here, the branches need to get thicker and thicker. But it's totally okay if some of the branches are floating, because as we go further and further into the background of this illustration, it's a good idea to be more and more careless with the details. That's kind of a characteristic thing of this painting style. And after the branches are done, I can move on and do the leaves. So I recommend starting out with an extremely light version of that green color, maybe even almost like a greenish gray, and I'll just do a couple of leaves like this. And these are all stroke based, so I'm starting very lightly, pressing harder, and then kind of tapering it off. But I'm just going to do a handful of light leaves just kind of randomly throughout this. And after that, I'll select a slightly different shade of that green, maybe something still a little bit light, not as dark as the branch, and I'll just do a few of those. Next, I can turn off the sketch. I don't think I need it anymore. And I'm going to add a little bit of kind of natural color variation, because some of these do look kind of too consistent to be watercolor. So I'm going to do that with the selection tool set to freehand. And I'll make a bunch of random selections focusing on the kind of mid portion of the leaves. And I'm going to feather it out quite a bit, maybe around 25 or 30%. Then I'm going to go to the curves adjustment here for the whole layer, and I'm just going to grab this bottom node and raise it up. And this is just a very even and gentle way of brightening those colors. There we go, that looks pretty good. Now I'm going to select it again, kind of a different random selection, but this time it'll be kind of crazy and wiggly like this. Then I'll feather that one out quite a bit, hue, saturation, and brightness, and I'm just going to shift the hue maybe towards something a little bit warmer. It just adds an interesting kind of secondary tone in there. Now if you want to, you can add a kind of vein going down the center of most of these leaves, and I'm going to do that here. I'll just make a new layer above the leaves I just painted. I'll select a pretty dark version of that green. Same Scratchy liner brush that we've been doing pretty much everything with so far. I'm just going to set it to a really small size, and on a handful of leaves I'll add a very rough kind of primitive center line. And here's the layer I did all those center lines on. I'm going to set the transparency mode to multiply, lower it to 0, and then slowly raise it back up. There we go, I think that looks pretty good. And I'll just merge it together, just so we don't have so many layers going on. So this next step here is totally optional, but I want to add a little bit more atmosphere to these branches. So if I imagine the body of the tree is over here, then these branches are probably getting a little bit more sunlight, and I can kind of approximate that by raising the brightness over there. So I'm going to grab the selection tool and set it to freehand, and I'll just select all these branches and leaves. I'll feather out that selection quite a bit. Then I'll go to hue, saturation, and brightness for the layer, and I'll just raise the brightness. And it's a little bit extreme, but I want that kind of dappled sunlight effect. So I think I'll set the brightness about to 63% like that. I think that looks pretty good. And then maybe to kind of counter that effect, I'll darken it and kind of cool it off a little bit over on this end. So I'll grab the selection tool again, just kind of lasso this area, feather it out quite a bit, hue, saturation, and brightness, and I'll darken it, saturate it, and then maybe shift the hue just into a slightly cooler tone. And there we go. It just gives it a little bit more three-dimensionality, like the branch is kind of reaching out into the sunlight. And at this point, we can turn on the bird illustration again. Now we have a little bit of an overlapping issue going on. Now there's a number of ways you can fix that, but I think the easiest way is actually to just erase the branch wherever it's covering up the bird. So I'm going to make sure the branch layer is selected. I'll grab the eraser, and at a pretty large size, I'll just erase it wherever I think the branch needs to be kind of cut off. Now it might also make sense that the bird is casting a shadow on the branches as well. So again, I've still got the branch layer selected, and I'm going to add a shadow with the selection tool set to freehand, and I'll just select wherever I think that shadow might be cast, just like that. I'll feather it out a tiny bit, hue, saturation, and brightness, and because it's just the branch layer that we've selected here, when I darken it, it's not going to affect the bird, it's just affecting the branches. So just an easy way to add kind of a shadow effect there. And there we go, this one is all done, and here's what it looks like when I print it out. So this tutorial is focused very specifically on this scene, but there are sort of two general tricks with this technique that I want to point out because they'll definitely help you when you use this painting style and apply it to other scenes. The first thing is the color palette. It seems very important that the color palette is sort of limited. For example, maybe you just stick to two main colors and a little bit of black. When you paint this way, it feels very limiting, but pretty much always after I finish the scene, I'm always glad that I stuck to the limited color palette because it really makes the final result look more elegant. The last trick I want to point out is how I'm focusing my attention to detail in just one area. So in the bird painting we just did, all of my focus was really on getting the face, eyes, and beak sort of perfected. The further away things in the scene were from that focal point, the more carelessly I sort of painted them. That's why it's fine when you have the branches and leaves in the background kind of disconnected and just floating around. They're just not really the focal point, and they don't really have to be done perfectly. If you remember a couple of days ago when I made that Zen wetlands painting tutorial with the dragonfly, I was really surprised at the response I got from that video. There was all kinds of comments and likes, and those are directly responsible for me revisiting the topic in this video. So if you enjoy this type of video, please leave a like and a comment down below. It's always astonishing to me that there are actually people out there in the world like me who are interested in this niche topic. And that pretty much wraps it up. As always, thank you so much for your support. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.